Good afternoon. I will call the sixth meeting of the Corporate Services Committee on March 19th, 2020, 12 p.m. to order. I'll start by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternative formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or call 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, contact csc@london.ca. So I'll look to my colleagues for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. There are 5 items, and I'll note that 3 of those have had revisions and there's one request for delegation, 2 revisions, 1 request for delegation. So I'll ask if my colleagues would like any of these pulled. Deputy Mayor Harriman?
I think 2.3, since there's a delegation request, I think we should deal with that separately. The other ones, I'm fine with them being dealt with through consent.
Okay, thank you. Any others?
I was going to say the same thing.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, then I'll ask for a motion to put 2.1, 2.2, 2.4, and 2.5 on the floor. And I'll go to committee if there's any comments about these items. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. My comment is on 2.2, the statement of remuneration and expenses. And this is more of a comment for our staff in the consideration of the formatting of the report in the future. On page 8, it outlines the statement of remuneration and expenses for elected officials, including members of council. Although I understand exactly why it's articulated that way, I think the way that it has been interpreted over the last little while and interpreted different ways might express the need for us to maybe clarify the formatting. I'll give you an example. The Free Press, in their articulation of expenses, took the expense lines, the portion of the benefit lines that had either vehicle reimbursements and then external organization lines, added them together and then did a comparison of expenses on them across councillors. CBC added everything together, including salaries, and did an expression of these are the expenses of councillors and compared them to each other. And I think 2 different media outlets called different people the lowest and highest spender. Not that I care about the lowest and highest spender, although I was one of them when you add in FCM expenses. I do think that it is causing some inconsistency in the way that people are perceiving the reports. I think I understand why you have to pull the things that are benefits out of the expenses, like the vehicle allowance, because that is a very clear articulation. I'm not sure if there's any improvements you can make to make this a little clearer. I think what people want to do is know, what did councillors spend on their $15,000 expense account? What are the other expenses that they may have had related to their job? What was their income and benefits? And certainly that is all legitimate public information. The way it's being formatted here, I think people are drawing different conclusions and pulling out different pieces of information and comparing them different ways that maybe isn't clear. So I'm not suggesting anything specific. I just wanted to point out that it was interpreted differently by different media outlets, and maybe we can look at the formatting of that report in the future and see if there's a way that we can clarify it, since we have a whole year until the next one. So that was my only comment on that.
Thank you. Were you looking for a response from staff, Councillor? Okay, thank you. All right, any other comments on these items? We'll go to Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, Chair. And this, just a brief comment with respect to the appointment of hearing officers to conduct hearings under various City of London bylaws. I look at the 2 individuals who've been involved in the past respecting the municipal election compliance audit, Dan Ross and Christine Scrimsher. I think those are excellent candidates, and I certainly want to acknowledge the clerk's report with respect to these individuals, and certainly my support that they be that's going to be introduced to council, but ultimately be appointed as hearing officers. I think those are great choices.
Thank you. Further comments? Perhaps I could ask one question from the chair about, again, item 2.5. My question to staff is about how many appeals would we expect our hearing officers to conduct in a day?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it depends on what bylaw we're dealing with. The administrative monetary penalty bylaw for parking tickets, sometimes they're dealing with 10 a day. Sometimes they're only dealing with 5. It depends on how many come in. With respect to the other ones, they can do up to 3 or 4 a day. For example, we had a hearing last week where we did, one of the hearings was a dog muzzle. 2 of them were tree preservation. So it varies on how they come in, but we try to make sure it's not overly burdensome for the hearings officers and try to spread them out, but also look at the fact that they have a personal life and try to put it also as many as we can so that they don't have to come on multiple days. So it's a balance.
Thank you very much. All right. So that motion is up. I'll look for a mover. Councillor Hopkins, Deputy Mayor Helmer will second that. Right. And I'll turn your attention to the screen as we call that vote.
Councillor Hopkins? Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
Our final consent item is the development charges housekeeping matters related to Bill 108. And with that is a request for delegation status from Mr. Wallace, the London Development Institute. So, Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I'm happy to move the motion to accept the delegation request.
Okay, thank you. So that's moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Morgan. And now I'll look to call that question. So.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, happy to see you. You have 5 minutes to let us know what the London Development Institute has to say about this matter.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our committee for allowing me to speak on a consent item, which I know you have to do your procedural bylaw, which I will follow up with eventually on that. But I'm here to talk about the report that says the development charges housekeeping matter. It's a housekeeping matter in the sense that it's something you're required to do by the province of Ontario based on the changes that they've made at Bill 108. But to us, it's not just housekeeping. Housekeeping means something else to us in terms of, you got the wrong word in the wrong place kind of thing, cleaning it up. This is much more of a significant change. Not you're doing, but the province is doing. And I would first of all want to thank your staff for they've been very proactive in keeping us involved, and Urban League and a number of other organizations, the Home Builders Association, on the changes that are coming. And so there are basically 3 or 4 that are coming down the pike due to Bill 108, and the interest rate being charged for deferred and frozen DCs was one of the issues on, for this for-profit and for not-for-profit organizations. We've been bugging them a little bit about what we're going to do on that, because it is a possibility that you could use the interest rate as a tool in the affordability toolbox to try to get organizations to build affordable housing through charging a less interest rate than what you would get necessarily from the other sources of income, of revenue, or not revenue, of financing that our people get. And I think, be frank, from based on our membership, we think you took, the staff are recommending the right approach, that you shouldn't be using this as a method to bonus the development industry and trying to make that happen, and that this is not the right spot to do it. At the end of the day, DCs are paid for by developers, and so any change to that, you know, any deferral of it will end up paying them, they end up paying for it. So that's in general. What we do want to say on this is that this report did come out on Wednesday, which was great. I have circulated it to my members. I've had a number of questions back on it that I have not been able to answer yet, but I'm hoping that we will have another opportunity with the group before this becomes the bylaw. Now, I know it says in the recommendation is to be introduced, so I need clarification whether that means it's introduced on the meeting and passed that night, or if it's just introduced and be passed at a future meeting. I need that clarification. Because if it's coming on March 24th, that's the week after March break-in. Having no kids in school, well, somebody had to remind me that it's March break next week or so. So it may be more difficult for us to get a response to some of the questions, but we would like some clarification on on a few items. However, we are in favor, just so you know, of the certainly the basics. We appreciate the non-residential building construction price index that is being recommended here. We're familiar with it. It's what's been the accelerator for the DCs that we're using now. And so we are happy with that choice. We had a little bit of not confusion, but a little bit about getting our mind around that we're using the index as an interest rate. Because when we thought interest rate, we thought like, you know, what prime plus 1, prime plus 2, you know, like what we would normally consider an interest rate. But this rate works for us, and we're happy with that approach. We want to be clear that we are happy with the and supportive of the opportunity that the report provides for the not-for-profit housing or organizations. We thought that we are supportive that this has that opportunity for the deferred payments for them, that might be more beneficial for them. The one area, and we do appreciate really appreciate the alternative payment agreement process that's been outlined in this report, because we believe that this program that has been set out in 108 may not work for us, and that we be able to have the opportunity to have an alternative agreements with the city on certain developments instead of everything having to be deferred, works for us. And so, and we think it probably, as the report outlines, works for some not-for-profits based on other revenue sources that they may get. So we're very supportive of that, that flexibility is built into this. To be frank with you, when we first saw this, we thought that this was an opt-in program, but it's basically an opt-out program, that this is an absolute requirement and you have to opt out of it, not into it. And so we're happy with the report that's going forward. We would just like a little, make sure I have enough time to get the answers back, whether it's through committee or just through my input from staff, who have been very responsive and been very good on this, because it's not an easy topic in terms of the issues, and because they're all intertwined. We got our CBC coming. We have this interest rate on deferred payments, which they didn't have before. All those kinds of things that are coming together, all sort of at once. And it was just last week that the province put out the proposed regulations on the CBC, on the community benefits piece, and they're asking for input. We thought they'd give us what the answer was at this point so we can move forward on it. So there's lots up in the air, and we appreciate this report, and we appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it, but we do appreciate enough time to be able to get a good response. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you at 4 o'clock.
All right, so a couple questions seem to have been raised. So just confirm with our clerks that in fact at the next council meeting, this was going to be enacted. So yes, so the answer is yes there. And there seemed to be a suggestion that deferral would make it easier to go through for other communities. So perhaps I could just ask staff if there's any implications of delaying this should the committee want to move in that direction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, through you. So we have been incorporating the stakeholder feedback to date for the bylaw that's proposed and before you here today. We do have an opportunity to have further dialogue offline with Mr. Wallace and his team to talk about the matters that may be outstanding. However, I would caution you on deferring this to a future meeting. Right now, our window in terms of the permits that are being issued that this could be eligible for is rapidly closing. So the province implemented these changes effective January 1st. However, it's taken several months to actually put together the framework on the applicable interest to put before you and to charge as well. There's a lot of, to be honest, inconsistencies amongst municipalities, and there's been a lot of scrambling in the municipal sector to actually put this together. So we think that this is a good approach and a good policy for you. I will note that this policy is independent of the DC bylaw, so should you need to vary it in the future, you can do that, so you do have flexibility built in.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to committee then. Any Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for the report, and Mr. Wallace for your remarks as well. I know DCs are very complicated. I'm always trying to figure them out as we go along, and now we have a number of changes coming forward. To me, this is the beginning of the changes coming forward. I've been waiting to see how Bill 108 is going to look like. So just to follow up on the question that was asked, if this recommendation is passed today, it will go to council on the 25th, and a bylaw will be introduced. And I appreciate your comments that this was started back in January the 1st, and there will be opportunities, if needed, that we can revisit that bylaw. So I would think, I guess my question, I've got two questions here. When it comes to the changes moving forward in Bill 108, will it be coming through this process, coming to corporate, or can we see it coming to planning committee as well with changes in bylaws? I just want to have a better understanding, because I could see a lot more coming to us throughout this year, and what that process is going to look like. And my second question is concerns about a shortfall here at all between when we implement, and especially the deferral parts of, I can understand why we're making these changes, especially in the not-for-profit sector, but how are we managing those shortfalls, if any, or changes as we proceed? So, two questions there, through the chair.
Well, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So just on the Bill 108 piece, of course, we always like to try to bring everything to you as a complete package in an omnibus way. We will be doing that for the lion's share of the Bill 108 matters. That'll be going to SPPC, as given that it's large policy matters that'll be going there, which will actually be amendments to your development charges bylaw. We're going to have a report to you this month at SPPC about the proposed changes to the 2021 DC study, if you can believe that. We'll have information on that related to Bill 108 for the DC piece and also the CBC piece there too. So that'll be coming to you. We thought, given the nature of these items, though, it was important to get this to you at this time. In terms of shortfall and deferral, it's a very good question. It's one that I don't, to be honest, have a good solid answer for. We don't really know what the experience is going to be to model this in a really robust way. The ability to charge interest, though, is a revenue mitigation tool. So it's essentially giving us the ability to charge interest to collect along, but it's not a one-to-one relationship in terms of the interest that will be collected with what they may have paid in terms of permit, because that's not necessarily a completely dependent relationship that exists there. We're hoping that it means, though, that we'll be able to be made whole as best we can. That's why we have the recommendations before you today.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you for that. What would happen if we did experience a change in amounts, and how will you be looking at that and dealing with it?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thankfully, the city does have the growth management implementation strategy update that's done every year. With that, one of the key components is we look at the amount of revenues that have been collected, our reserve fund balances, and how that can impact the timing of infrastructure that's required to be provided. It's one tool available to council if you are seeing some concerns associated with that, to defer projects to address that issue. Again, we're hoping to not be in that kind of a situation with the changes that are before you here. Council can also always initiate a DC background study update if you do feel that there is a significant revenue shortfall. We do have DC monitoring that we do as well and bring before you.
Any other questions on this item? Okay, well, I'll look for a mover and a seconder then. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by our mayor. And we'll call that question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
Thank you. We've got no scheduled items, and we have 4 items for direction. One is an added item. So we'll look at the first 3 are applications for issuance of proclamation. And I'll let the committee know our clerks have prepared wording for a number of types of motions in case some of these don't apply to the policy. So I'll look to committee to see if you'd like to deal with these individually or all 3 at once. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'd like to move them all at once. I think they're all reasonable, and I think we could proclaim them.
Thank you. Mayor Holder.
If that's not yet a motion, just want to discuss the issue. We can either take the approach that we approve everything, in which case it's gone through the clerk, come to us. I won't talk about vetting, but I will talk about that they've gone through the clerk and come to us. I think it's clear that if we look at more specifically at the direction that we've been given with respect to making proclamations, you know, if I was to, I suggest that I'd like to talk about one in specific, but I'm not sure what the direction is going to be on this, because my challenge is that I don't think one, while it's a noble cause, comes even close to any of our requirements. And so we either take the premise that we approve everything, which is certainly one thing, but I'm cautioning committee on that, or we go through some form of process. So if you want to speak to a specific one as a reference point, I will, but I'm at your pleasure, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps you mentioned that these were vetted by the clerks. Perhaps we could go to the clerk and just have for comments on these items and how they fit in with the policy.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in accordance with the policy, the decision with respect to whether the applications comply is at council's discretion, not the clerk's office. The clerk's office received the proclamations and have placed them on the agenda for the committee and council's consideration. But unlike some other policies with respect to lighting of the buildings and things like that, where you're delegated the authority, in this case, it is totally up to council to make the decisions. So clerk's office did not vet these and is not making a recommendation in accordance with the policy.
Okay, thank you. So there, I guess it's up to our committee then to decide whether or not these match the policy. And we've got, they may not. And if that's the case, we can either refuse them, pass them, or pass them notwithstanding our policy. So, Mayor Holder.
So if I'm going to give a comment, if I was looking at these individually, I would say the challenge with the first one is it cultural or religious? If it's religious, it doesn't qualify according to the rules. But if it's cultural, which is what is on the application, then I think there's an argument for it. In terms of the second, they don't have a direct organization here, but they're certainly in London, but it's Whitby, and there's certainly but there's a local individual that has sponsored the request, made reference to a counselor who has a family member impacted by this, but they don't have a local organization, but no one would challenge the nobility of the cause. Same as no one would argue in the first instance about the nobility of the organization seeking the application. The third is one that is I don't see any connection. It comes out of Toronto. It's the Coalition of Toronto. It is, there's no local connectivity. Who would not support limb loss awareness? I mean, so the cause is noble, but there's no connectivity to London, which I thought, as I read before, was part of the requirement, even though there are certainly Londoners who are impacted by this, absolutely. So here we are in a situation where, as I feared when we were going to have a proclamation policy, that without it being vetted, with it being a transfer through to committee, it'll be debated at committee and no doubt at council as well, because we're going to see every application, because to be fair to the clerks, that's the direction that we gave them. But if there's no test on this, except the lens that we put it through, then the political lens versus the prescriptive lens that we had put in terms of the policy, then I guess we're going to review each one. So I don't know how you can support them collectively, respectfully, without looking at each in its own right. And if I could get my head around the first couple, I'm not sure I could get my head around the third. But again, it depends. We're the ones doing the vetting is what it means, and we have to determine whether each of these individually qualifies according to the policy. So I think it would be up to us to say, application 1 qualifies, application 2 qualifies, application 3 qualifies. If they all qualify, and that's the confidence that committee has, then so be it. But that's what we're being asked to do. I just want to make it really clear. That's what committee is being asked to do, because that's the direction that we set. So the clerks have done everything right. They passed it through, but it's now incumbent on us in each one of these.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to take that as a request, or at least some very good advice to split these up and deal with them individually. So perhaps I'll look then for a motion for 4.1, which is from the Guru Nanak Mission Society of London, Ontario. So that's 4.1. So, Deputy Mayor Helmer is still happy to move that. Can I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Morgan. And comment, and Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a comment, but before I do that, if I can ask a question through you to staff on the vetting process. So just so I understand what we have undertaken, applications come into city clerk processes the forms, does not make an opinion or not, it just comes directly to us. So I would assume these are the only ones that we have received to date, and it's really up to us. So I am very happy. I see the clerk nodding. I just wanted to make sure I understood that process. I read the form, the application. I'm supportive of this for the main reason, it being that we're joining other municipalities as well as they acknowledge the Sikh community in the month of April April. There are a number of events going on, and it's proclaiming there are reasons why it should be in this month as well. So without going into the weeds, I'm supportive.
Mayor Holder.
Well, with all respect, I think that because the vetting is with us, we have to get into the weeds on every one of them. I think that's what it really comes down to. And there is not one council member that would not respectfully appreciate the cultural and, I would say, humanitarian contributions that they make to this community. I think that's obvious. I think the letter from the president of the Guru Nanak Mission Society was clear on that. When I look at this, I guess what I'm trying to understand, and just me, in broad terms, I would support it, is Sikh Heritage Month celebrating their religion. If it's celebrating their religion, that's contrary to policy. If it's celebrating their cultural, humanitarian, community commitment, which is what they talk to, then it does support. So there's the challenge I've got, and I'm trying to decide. And again, it came through us as we have requested that we receive, but now we have to vet. So we haven't asked the clerk for an opinion, and I'm not going to do that. It's not fair because the onus is on us. But I'm trying to understand, is this the Sikh religion, or is this the community? Because again, I'll come back to what our bylaws, our policy is to determine if it qualifies. So I put that out there as a question that we'll ultimately have to decide.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, and not that I wanted to go into a debate, but I'm happy to go into a debate, Your Worship, as well. If you look at the information we received, it is about the Sikh community, and we're joining other municipalities within Ontario, acknowledging the month of April as proclaiming it as because of the Sikh community. I didn't read anything more into that than supporting the community that exists here in London and joining other municipalities as well.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yeah, I think this is a good example of the kind of proclamation we should be making. I mean, there's a great community here in London. There's a history that we could be recognizing, and I think it's a good idea. You know, it's been done provincially, it's been done nationally. I know it's done in other municipalities that are kind of ahead of us and have a larger Sikh community. And I support it. I think this is a good, sort of like a perfect example of what we could be proclaiming. So I do support it. I think it's within the policy because it's about the heritage and the history of the Sikh community. So.
Thank you. Mayor Holder.
My final comment, because there's no debate. I don't think there's any question about the contribution of the Sikh community. I'm prepared to support this because I can work through this in terms of the contributions of the community in relation to the cultural, humanitarian, the things I mentioned earlier. My caution is going to be going forward, and it was only to make a point going forward with certain applications, since we are now judge and jury on this stuff. Maybe it's jury then judge. That we have to look at all these with that lens, and so it would be my caution. But I'm exceptionally comfortable supporting this for the reasons that my colleagues have mentioned.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps I can make a comment from the chair, if that's fine. So if we're looking at the heritage and history of the Sikh community, our Sikh community made history last year when they held a Ramadan dinner for the Muslim community. So I had the pleasure of being in attendance for that, and it was a great event. Religions reaching out to support each other, which is another part of London's heritage. When there's been tragedies suffered by religions in London, all our faith communities have gotten together to support each other. And so I'll support this as well. And of course, we'll have the opportunity to see over the month how much this is heritage versus religion, if that, so we'll have the opportunity to see how this comes out. But that was definitely in our policy. So at this point then, this having been moved and seconded, we'll cast our votes.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
All right, and next we'll look for a potential motion. Well, let's call to 4.2 and ask our committee how they would like to deal with that. Any comments on 4.2? Okay, so I'll then look for a motion to approve this request, this application. Deputy Mayor Helmer, and seconded by Councillor Morgan. Any comments on this one? No, okay, let's call that question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
Okay, and the third proclamation request is for the Amputee Coalition of Toronto. And out of respect for the mayor's comments, I will say that we have the opportunity to either pass this or pass this notwithstanding the policy that says there should be a local connection. So I'll look to our committee to decide how they would like to go forward with that. Mayor Holder.
Well, if you haven't asked for a motion yet, so if you're just looking for an opinion at this stage, I'll come back to my earlier comments. We'll take by passing this, we take the premise, I think we take the position that there's almost nothing we won't pass. And by the way, having said that, there certainly will be. I mean, if there are things that are really clear that be they racist or inciting hatred, I mean, I think those are easy. Look, this is a noble cause. No one's challenging that. I'm trying to read and understand the connectivity to our city, notwithstanding that there's some nobility in bringing awareness in terms of limb loss. I don't know anything about the Amputee Coalition of Toronto. It doesn't indicate that that they've got support in terms of proclamations in other communities. But this is going to go through, colleagues, this is going to go through every type of agency and well-intended group. And the question is, unless if we're trying to bring meaning to these because of their local connectivity, which is why I supported the second one, by the way, particularly that was heartfelt, and I think that was thoughtful. I just, with deep respect to this organization, I just don't see the connectivity to anyone in our city that would justify this as passing. So respectfully, I won't support it unless I hear some rationale that makes it stronger and more likely that we should. Again, unless we want to take the premise that we'll pass pretty much everything. So I'll leave my comments there, Chair.
Mayor Holder, would you then like to put perhaps a motion on the floor that the application be received and no action be taken?
I'm happy to do that, thanks.
Okay, so the mayor has moved that this application be received without action. Is there a seconder for that motion? I would second that motion. So let's, are there any comments? Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Well, the way I read the policy, sort of in an expansive way, which is, you know, I think unless there's a clear disqualification, then I'm in favor of supporting the proclamation. I don't think the policy requires that the applicant be from London. I think there just needs to be a nexus with London, and I think it is very clear that there are a lot of people who have lost limbs who are in London. And I think when we're thinking about what is the purpose of the proclamation, it's to raise awareness in our community about this issue. And so similarly, there are people who have Guillain-Barré syndrome and are dealing with that issue, and we're raising awareness of that. And I think there are lots of people in London, and I think as the regional sort of health center, I think in fact, there's a lot of reason why people are coming to London, even if they live outside of London, they're coming here for rehab and to work on their health. I think there's a lot of a military amputee nexus that also would happen in London because of our military history here. So I think this is appropriate, even though it's coming from an agency in Toronto. I mean, there's a national organization around the Amputee Coalition as well. And I wouldn't treat the application differently if it had come from them. You know, if it come from the national organization or it comes from this organization in Toronto. I did look into the organization in Toronto to see like what kind of peer support are they providing to people in London, because they seem to be based in Toronto, and they say that they have some geographic limitations, but they will do FaceTime, they will call people if they can, and they have peer support who can come to where people are, they'll come. And so I think that is enough for me to support it. I think it's we will have lots of these discussions. I think these first couple we'll have to work out how we're going to interpret the policy. Are we going to be very restrictive about it, or are we going to be a bit more expansive? And I don't think, and the policy doesn't say that you have to be applying from a London-based organization. It just says there needs to be a connection into the social, economic, cultural fabric of London. I think that exists. So I'm happy to support it. I guess I'll vote against the idea that we will take no action, and we'll see what the decision of the committee is. I think it's appropriate that we have these discussions, because we're going to have to sort out like how are we going to handle these things. And I think if there was a London applicant, maybe it would be interpreted differently by some folks. For me anyway, is there an issue here? Is it relevant to the community in London? Is there a connection to that social fabric here in our city? I think it's there, so I'm happy to support it.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go back to the mayor.
Yeah, if I can, colleagues, I'm going to turn your attention on page 81 to K, the second bullet. And proclamations will not be issued for events or organizations with no direct connection to the City of London. I said it in my first comments, not disrespecting this organization. But I would argue that this doesn't talk about social fabric, but in broad terms, we can pass almost anything if that's the parameter that we use. No one is challenging the merits of this organization to do what they do in Toronto. And it's not to suggest the impacts that they have may have some direct or indirect, I don't know, connectivity to our city. But either our proclamations will mean something because there's some direct connectivity. I'll quote again, events or organizations with no direct connection to the City of London will not have proclamations issued. And so the road I see us going down is that anything goes. And again, with the exception of the most heinous. And if that's it makes our job easy if that's the intention. But I'm trying to bring higher regard and broader special status for those organizations that have that direct connectivity to our city. I think that brings, to me, it feels like it brings more meaning to them. But if we want to do Toronto proclamations, then again, that'll be the will of council.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, so I think this is a good discussion. I absolutely see the point that the mayor is making. And so let me share my thoughts on this particular proclamation. These are new, and the way that we're assessing the components of K are obviously going to be a function of, individual councillors. So events, organizations with no direct connection to London. So what is a direct connection to London is, some councillors can interpret if you have clients who are served in the London community, that's a direct connection to London. We want to promote this. Now, I will say they did not do a great job in their application letter of identifying that. And that's probably something that is a deficiency in the application. So to move forward, given that this is something that I would like to support, but I understand that colleagues' concerns, is we have another option here, and that is not kill it at this point, but defer it to the council meeting on the 24th and provide a direction to our staff to reach out to the organization and ask for information on their direct connection to the City of London. That information ideally could come back for council, and then council could make a decision on this particular proclamation, because it seems to me like that is the barrier that we're facing here, is that if colleagues felt like there was a direct connection and that this organization could do a better job in their letter in articulating that there would be wider support, and I would like to see the proclamations that could be widely supported as widely as possible. So my inkling here is, let's use the time that we have before the proclamation needs to be issued, between now and council, seek some additional information, and allow all of council to make that decision with that additional information at that time. I wouldn't want to refer it to the next committee meeting, because then that would be the 31st, and then it would report into council in April, and I believe they're looking for an April recognition. So this would allow us to do it that way. So I would vote against not doing anything on this particular one now, but I would support referring it to council with a direction to our staff to reach out to the organization and seek more information on their connection to the London community.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee members. I think this is what we need to do, is have the debate and the conversation. I appreciate the comments made by our mayor as well. It's really important. I hear what you're saying, that these should mean things, and we need to have these discussions and the process, and we all interpret probably these applications in different ways. I think, given that we have a pilot project here, this is a really good question that we can put into our process about what is the direction, the direct connection of your organization to the City of London, and then we wouldn't have to investigate or have staff go back. I'd be happy to support that motion. I'm happy to support this motion, because when I read when we look at our policy, that events or organizations with no direct connection to the City of London, I would not say this organization does not have a direct connection. Because if you look into the information, you could see through our St. Joseph's Hospital in particular, but we have a number of hospitals here in the city. And given that it is a Canadian-based organization, I would think they would have contacts throughout many municipalities in the work that they do. So for me, I'm quite comfortable supporting them, but I think it is worthwhile to have this discussion, to debate how it's direct, how it's connected to the City of London, I think is a fair question to ask, but I see that connection and happy to support it. Will not be supporting this motion to, I haven't seen the motion yet, but I'll wait till it comes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. That was a fair question. We're looking for a little more meat to the idea of organizations that have a direct connection to London. I believe that may be in the policy, so perhaps I'll just go to the clerk if she can expand on that.
In addition to the section that's already been cited, I would draw attention to for the committee to section 4.1 of the policy, which outlines what proclamations are, and it does identify that proclamations would be issued to recognize organizations that reside or operate within the City of London. So the policy does get a little bit more specific than what's been contemplated as of right now. And the motion that's on the floor is currently available. If you refresh your screen, you should be able to see it.
Mayor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting. I think this becomes a case of unintended consequences. I'm not sure that the intent when we establish a proclamation policy is that each individual case would be vetted the way it's been today. And I appreciate it. Look, this is our first few, so we're learning and getting our way. I absolutely understand it. But it really comes down to a separate question. When I heard Councillor Morgan's comments, which I found interesting, but now we're saying to the clerk, you know what, tell you what, I'm not sure if they're gonna wait till it comes to committee first, and then we say to the clerk, please go back, or does the clerk look at it and say, well, I don't think there's quite enough information. We are now asking the clerks to do the work of the application process people, rather than coming back and say, I'm sorry, yours doesn't qualify as per our qualifications, which could have easily been done from the outset, because as the clerk just pointed out, they don't reside or operate within the City of London. But are people impacted by limb loss? Absolutely. In the City of London? Absolutely. Again, I've never been challenging that. But for two different reasons, it doesn't qualify. And so we either change the rules, and that might be one of the things that we do going forward, make them tighter, make them more relaxed, I don't know. But I think on the basis of the rules that this very council set, it doesn't get there. So going back and trying to ask them more questions in terms of, do you operate within the city? Do you reside in the city? I think those are pretty clear. And so hence I want to say to colleagues, I am not challenging the respect that probably any of us would hold for this organization if we knew more about them, and perhaps some of us have done more work on it than others. But on the face of the proclamation policy, it doesn't qualify. So at some point, we're going to do this with each one, or my sense more likely is we'll get our heads around it. We'll figure out the ones that we think are pretty easy to do, and then others we may challenge. But now the suggestion is that now the clerk has to go back and help them explain themselves as to how they do what they do. I'm not sure that our policy is particularly unique from other communities in terms of its exclusions and its positives. But these folks didn't do their work, and Councillor Morgan was right. They either did a really weak job of an application, or that's all they've got. And if that's all they've got, then from my standpoint, they don't qualify for two different reasons. And so I'll ask colleagues to support the suggestion, the motion put forward.
Yeah, any further comments before we vote on this item? Okay, let's call that question.
Closing the vote, the motion's lost 1-4.
Thank you. So that brings us, oh no, that motion's lost. We need to go back to our committee.
I'll move that we grant the proclamation.
Okay, thank you. So, is that granting the proclamation or granting it notwithstanding the policy? If I can ask for a clarity.
I believe it's consistent with the policy. So, like, as far as I can tell, they have people who are, like, they're operating in London. So,
Thank you.
It's fine.
All right. Okay. Any further comments on this? Councillor Hopkins? Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 4-1.
Chair, do you mind if I just make one comment? I just want to make it clear that should this pass council as well, that it's the direction that any documents are issued and signed by the mayor, and if that's the will of council, absolutely. I just want to make that clear, that doesn't change regardless of my own perspective on this particular case.
Thank you. Let's go to item 4.4. So this is a resolution regarding the Banking Ontario Works Royal Bank of Canada Right Pay Reloadable Payment Card Program Agreement. You recall that we passed this by bylaw in the last cycle. However, the Royal Bank is also seeking a motion by council. So I'll perhaps go to our staff to describe, if I can, what's being requested in this added item.
Through the chair to committee, Back at the last Corporate Services Committee, we had a good discussion with respect to the Ontario Works Royal Bank of Canada Right to Pay Reloadable Payment Card Program Agreement. And upon approval, after further discussion with the Royal Bank of Canada, in order for us to open an account with the Royal Bank of Canada, they identified some particular agreements that they wanted signed not only by Civic Administration, but by Council. So they proposed to us a resolution that they have required Council to approve. So the resolution before you is the wording that the Royal Bank of Canada provided us so that we can, in effect, open our account that will allow them and the city to proceed with the reloadable card program.
Thank you. Mayor Holder.
Thank you. So question to staff. So is this specifically and only transactional related authorities? Are there any potential negative impacts on the individuals to whom the cards are issued? If you would, please.
Through the chair to committee, no. If in essence, it actually provides some more rigor to who can transfer money to the Royal Bank on behalf of the clients.
Any other? Okay, moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Mayor Holder. Any other comments or questions about this item? Okay, let's put that vote up.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
There are no deferred matters. I'll look to committee for any items of additional business. Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Morgan. All in favor? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.